What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors sits down for what should be a routine morning interview, only to be met with disrespect and condescension that crosses every line? It only took 36 seconds for Michael Strahan to completely destroy his credibility on live television, sparking an explosive confrontation that would leave the entire Good Morning America panel speechless and one legendary guest walking off the set in disgust. The morning started like any other at the Good Morning America studios. The cameras were rolling, the lights were bright, and the energy in the room felt electric. Denzel Washington had arrived to discuss his latest film project, a passion piece he had been working on for years. He walked onto the set with his trademark calm confidence, greeted the panel with warm handshakes, and settled into his seat with that easy smile everyone knows so well. Robin Roberts sat to his left, looking professional as always in her blue blazer. George Stephanopoulos was reviewing his notes at the main desk. And Michael Strahan sat directly across from Denzel, adjusting his tie and flashing that big television smile. The segment began smoothly enough. Robin opened with a warm welcome. She said, "We are so thrilled to have you here this morning, Denzel. Your new film has been getting incredible buzz." Denzel nodded graciously and replied, "Thank you for having me. This project means the world to me. We spent 5 years developing it, working with an amazing cast and crew." George chimed in with his first question. He asked, "Tell us about the character you play. What drew you to this role?" Denzel leaned forward, his eyes lighting up as he began to speak about the character. He explained, "This is a man who has lost everything but refuses to give up on his principles. He reminded me of people I knew growing up. People who faced impossible odds but kept their dignity intact." The conversation was flowing naturally. Robin asked follow-up questions about the filming process. George wanted to know about working with the director. Everything seemed perfectly normal for a morning talk show interview. Then Michael Strahan decided to speak. He leaned back in his chair with a smirk on his face and said, "So Denzel, I gotta ask. You have been doing these serious dramatic roles for what, like 40 years now? Do not you think it is time to try something different? Maybe a comedy? Show people you can actually be funny?" The entire studio seemed to freeze. Robin's eyes went wide. George stopped writing on his notepad and looked up sharply. Even the camera operators shifted uncomfortably. Denzel's expression did not change, but there was a slight tightening around his eyes. He spoke very calmly. "I have done comedies. Several of them, actually, but I choose roles based on the story, not the genre." Michael was not done. He laughed, a loud, dismissive sound that echoed across the set. He said, "Come on." "Man, nobody remembers those. I am talking about a real comedy. Something people would actually watch. You know, lighten up a little. All these heavy, depressing movies you make." Robin tried to intervene. She said quickly, "Michael, I do not think that is..." But Michael kept going, talking right over her. He continued, "I mean, let's be honest. When was the last time you did something that was not all doom and gloom? Your movies are like homework. Important, sure, but nobody really wants to sit through them." George tried to steer the conversation away. He said, "Let's talk about the themes of the film." Michael interrupted him too. He was on a roll now, completely oblivious to the tension building in the room. He said, "And another thing, do you ever feel like maybe you are taking yourself too seriously? All this talk about dignity and principles. It is just entertainment, buddy. Not everyone needs to make every movie a history lesson." Denzel sat perfectly still. His hands were folded in his lap. His face showed no anger, just a kind of quiet disappointment. He spoke in that measured way he has, each word deliberate. "Entertainment can be many things. It can challenge people. It can inspire them. It can make them think. Just because something makes you uncomfortable does not mean it lacks value." Michael rolled his eyes. Actually, rolled his eyes on live television. He said, "There you go again. Always so serious. always so profound. Do you talk like this at home too? I bet your family loves that. Robin put her hand up. She said firmly, "Okay, Michael, I think we need to." Michael waved her off. He said, No, I am just being real here. Someone has to say it. All these actors who think they are changing the world with their little movies. Give me a break. You make pretend for a living, Denzel. Let's not act like you are curing cancer." George stood up from his chair. He said loudly, "Michael, that is enough." But the damage was done. Denzel looked at Michael for a long moment. Then he looked at Robin, then at George. You could see the wheels turning in his mind, the decision being made. He took a slow, deep breath. Denzel said quietly, but loud enough for everyone to hear, "I came here today to talk about a film that means something to me. A film that our team poured their hearts into. I did not come here to be mocked or belittled." Michael opened his mouth to respond, but Denzel raised one hand. Just one hand, a simple gesture, but it commanded absolute silence. The whole studio held its breath. Denzel continued, his voice steady and calm. "I have been in this industry for decades. I have worked with the best directors, the best actors, the best crews in the world. I have never, not once, been treated with such disrespect in a professional setting." Robin was nodding. She said, "Denzel, please, we are so sorry." Denzel shook his head gently. He said, "This is not your fault, Robin. You have always been a class act. George, you too. But this," he gestured toward Michael without looking at him, "this is unacceptable." Michael finally seemed to realize he had gone too far. His cocky expression faded. He stammered, "Look, I did not." Denzel cut him off. "You did not what? You did not mean to insult my work? You did not mean to diminish my career? You did not mean to suggest that what I do has no value?" The silence was deafening. Michael looked down at his hands. He mumbled, "I was just trying to be funny." Denzel stood up slowly. He straightened his jacket. "Funny at whose expense? Mine? The expense of every artist who tries to create something meaningful? The expense of the people who see themselves in these stories?" George stepped forward. He said, "Denzel, please, let me apologize on behalf of all of us." Denzel placed a hand on George's shoulder. He said, "You have nothing to apologize for, George. Neither does Robin. But I cannot sit here and pretend this is okay." Robin stood up too. She had tears in her eyes. She said, "We understand completely. This should never have happened." Denzel nodded to her with genuine warmth. Then he turned to face Michael directly for the first time since the confrontation began. The look on his face was not anger. It was something deeper: disappointment, sadness, a kind of weary recognition that some people will never understand. He said, "You know what the real tragedy is? You had an opportunity here, an opportunity to have a real conversation about art, about storytelling, about why certain stories need to be told. Instead, you chose mockery. You chose arrogance. You chose to tear down rather than build up." Michael tried again. He said, "Denzel, come on, can we just..." Denzel shook his head. "No, we cannot just move past this. Because this is not just about me. This is about every person who has ever been told their work does not matter. Every person who has been mocked for caring too much, for trying too hard, for believing that what they do has meaning." He started to walk toward the edge of the set. The crew members parted to let him through. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every moment. Michael called out, "Wait, please, I am sorry. I really am." Denzel paused. He did not turn around, but he spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "I believe you are sorry. Sorry that you got called out. Sorry that this is being recorded. But are you sorry for what you actually said? For what you actually think? I do not believe you are." Robin moved toward Denzel. She said, "Please, Do not let this ruin your morning. We can start over. We can... Denzel turned to face her one last time. His expression softened. He said gently, Robin, you are one of the good ones. You always have been. But some things cannot be started over. Some things, once said, cannot be unsaid. George had his hands in his pockets, looking absolutely devastated. He said, We will make this right somehow. Denzel nodded at him. I know you will try, but the damage is done. Michael stood up from his chair, finally understanding the gravity of what he had done. He said, Denzel, I swear I did not mean. Denzel held up that hand again. What you meant and what you said are two different things. And even if they were not, it does not change the fact that you thought it was acceptable to speak to a guest that way, to speak to anyone that way. One of the producers ran onto the set, a woman in her 40s with a clipboard. She looked panicked. She whispered something to George, who nodded grimly. Denzel watched this exchange and then said, Do not cut the cameras. Let people see this. Let them see what happens when disrespect goes unchecked. The producer looked at him with wide eyes. She asked, Are you sure? Denzel nodded. I am sure. Transparency matters. Accountability matters. Michael was sweating now. You could see it on his forehead under the studio lights. He said desperately, What can I do to fix this? Denzel looked at him thoughtfully. You can think about why you said what you said. You can examine why you felt the need to diminish someone else's work. You can ask yourself if that is the kind of person you want to be. Robin was crying openly now. She said, This is not who we are. Good Morning America is not this. Denzel gave her a sad smile. I know it is not, Robin, but he is part of your team. And that is something you all have to figure out. George cleared his throat. He said formally, We will be addressing this situation internally. Denzel replied, I hope you do. Not for my sake. I will be fine. But for the sake of every guest who comes on this show expecting to be treated with basic human respect. He began walking again, heading toward the exit. His posture was straight, his head held high. There was a dignity in the way he moved that made Michael's earlier comments seem even more absurd. Michael called out one more time, his voice cracking. I really am sorry, Denzel. Please believe me. Denzel stopped at the door. He spoke without turning around. I believe you feel bad right now, but feeling bad is not the same as understanding what you did wrong. And until you understand that, your apology means nothing. Robin walked quickly to catch up with him. She said quietly, Can I walk you out? Denzel nodded. They walked together through the studio corridors, past crew members who stood frozen in shock, past makeup artists and production assistants who could not believe what they had just witnessed. As they reached the exit, Robin said, I am so sorry. You deserved better. Denzel squeezed her hand gently. You did nothing wrong. Keep being the professional you are. The world needs more people like you. She hugged him, and he hugged her back. Then he walked out into the New York morning, leaving behind a studio full of people trying to process what had just happened. Back on the set, the cameras were still rolling. George stood there looking shell-shocked. Michael sat in his chair, head in his hands. The producer was speaking urgently into her headset, trying to figure out how to handle the situation. George finally spoke to the camera. His voice was shaky. He said, We're going to take a break. We need a moment here. But before they could cut to commercial, Michael stood up. He looked directly at the camera, his face a mixture of shame and realization. He said, No, do not cut. I need to say something. George looked at him warily. Michael, maybe we should. Michael shook his head. No, Denzel was right. People need to see this. I messed up. I messed up badly. I was disrespectful, I was arrogant, and I was completely out of line. He took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly. He continued, I do not have an excuse. I was trying to be funny, trying to be edgy, and I failed to see that I was hurting someone who did not deserve it. Someone who has given so much to the world through his work. Robin had returned to the set. She stood next to George, her eyes red from crying. She did not say anything, just listened. Michael went on, I think about all the young people watching this show. All the aspiring artists, the dreamers, the people who want to create something meaningful. And I think about how I just told them that their work does not matter, that caring too much is something to be mocked. His voice broke. That is not what I believe. That is not who I want to be. But that is who I was today, and I have to own that. George put a hand on his shoulder. He said quietly, we all make mistakes. Michael looked at him with watery eyes. This was not a mistake. This was a choice. A choice to be cruel instead of kind. A choice to tear down instead of build up. And now, I have to live with that. The studio was completely silent except for the hum of the cameras. Everyone stood frozen, unsure of what to do or say. Michael addressed the camera one final time. He said, to Denzel Washington, if you are watching this, I am truly sorry. Not because I got caught. Not because this is on television. But because I hurt you. I disrespected you. And you did not deserve that. Nobody does. He paused, gathering himself. I hope someday you can forgive me. But more importantly, I hope I can learn from this. I hope I can be better. Because you showed me today what grace looks like, what dignity looks like. And I fell so far short of that standard. Robin stepped forward. She said to the camera, we will be right back after this break. The cameras finally cut. The moment they did, Michael collapsed into his chair. He put his face in his hands and started to cry. George and Robin stood on either side of him, not saying anything, just being there. The producer came over, still looking stressed, but also sympathetic. She said gently, we need to figure out what to do next. George nodded. Give us a minute. Robin knelt down next to Michael's chair. She said softly, what you just did took courage. Michael looked at her through his tears. It does not fix anything. She shook her head. No, it does not. But it is a start, and that matters. George crouched down too. He said, we have all said things we regret. The difference is whether we learn from them or not. Michael wiped his eyes. I do not know if I can face the camera again. Robin said firmly. You can, and you will, because running away does not help anyone, least of all you. The commercial break was ending. The floor manager started counting down. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The red lights came back on. George looked into the camera, his face serious. He said, welcome back. As you just saw, we had a very difficult moment here on Good Morning America. A moment that should never have happened. Robin continued, Denzel Washington came to our studio this morning as our guest. He deserved our respect, our professionalism, and our gratitude for taking the time to be here. Instead, he was met with comments that were inappropriate and hurtful. Michael sat there, looking smaller somehow, diminished. He said quietly, I own that completely. There's no excuse. George looked at the camera directly. We want to be clear. What happened here does not represent the values of Good Morning America. We pride ourselves on respectful, thoughtful conversations with our guests. Today, we failed to live up to that standard. Robin added, Denzel Washington is a treasure. His body of work speaks for itself. The way he conducts himself, the grace he showed even in the face of disrespect, that is who he is. And we are honored that he has been a guest on our show many times over the years. Michael finally looked up at the camera. His eyes were still red. He said, I hope Mr. Washington knows how sorry I am, and I hope everyone watching knows that what I did was wrong. Completely, utterly wrong. There was a long pause. Nobody seemed to know what to say next. Finally, George said, "We are going to move forward with today's show. But we wanted to address this head on, in real time, because that is what our viewers deserve." Robin nodded. "And we will continue to address it in the days to come. This is not something we will sweep under the rug." The show went on, but the energy was different. Every segment felt heavy, weighed down by what had happened. The other guests were visibly uncomfortable. The crew moved through their duties mechanically, still processing the confrontation they had witnessed. Throughout the rest of the broadcast, Michael barely spoke. When he did, his voice was subdued, lacking the usual bravado. George and Robin carried most of the conversation, their professionalism shining through, even as you could see the strain on their faces. During a commercial break, one of the crew members approached Michael. He was an older man, someone who had been with the show for years. He said quietly, "I worked with Mr. Washington on another project once. He is one of the kindest men I have ever met." Michael looked at him, fresh tears forming. He asked, "What did I do?" The crew member shook his head. "I do not know, son, but you better figure it out." As the show finally came to an end, George gave the closing remarks. He said, "Thank you for watching today. It was not the show we planned, but perhaps it was the show we needed. A reminder that words matter, that respect matters, that how we treat each other, especially in our most public moments, says everything about who we are." Robin added, "We will see you tomorrow morning, and we promise to do better." The cameras went off, the lights dimmed. The studio, which had been so full of energy just a few hours before, now felt empty and cold. Michael sat alone in his chair while the crew packed up around him. George had gone to speak with the producers. Robin had left the set, needing space to process everything that had happened. A young production assistant, barely out of college, stopped next to Michael. She hesitated, then said, "Mr. Strahan, can I say something?" Michael looked up at her and nodded. She said, "I am studying film. I want to be a director someday. And I watch Denzel Washington movies all the time. Not because I have to, but because they inspire me. They make me want to tell stories that matter. So when you said those things about his work, it hurt. Not just for him, but for all of us who believe that art can change the world." Michael's face crumpled. He said, "I am so sorry." She nodded. "I know you are. But sorry is not enough. You have to show it. You have to be different." Then she walked away, leaving Michael sitting there in the dim studio, surrounded by the wreckage of what his words had caused. Meanwhile, Denzel Washington was in a car heading away from the studio. He looked out the window at the city passing by, his expression thoughtful. His phone had been buzzing non-stop with messages of support, but he had not looked at it yet. His publicist, sitting next to him, asked, "Are you okay?" Denzel smiled, a sad but genuine smile. He replied, "I am fine. I have been through worse, but I hope that young man learned something from this. I really do." The publicist said, "The video is already going viral. People are furious." Denzel shook his head. "I do not want people to be furious. I want them to think, to ask themselves how they treat others, how they talk about other people's work, other people's passions." He looked back out the window. That is what matters. Not revenge, not punishment, but understanding. Back at the studio, the aftermath was just beginning. The producers were in an emergency meeting. Public relations was already fielding calls. Social media was exploding with reactions. But in that moment, as Denzel's car drove through the streets of New York, and as Michael sat alone in the empty studio, and as Robin and George tried to make sense of what had happened, one thing was clear. The confrontation had revealed something important. Something about respect, about dignity, about the power of words and the responsibility that comes with a public platform. Denzel Washington had walked off that set, but he had done so with his head held high, his principles intact, and his dignity undiminished. He had shown everyone watching what it meant to stand up for yourself without losing your grace. And Michael Strahan, sitting in that empty studio, had learned a lesson that no amount of success or fame could have taught him otherwise. That words have consequences, that disrespect has a price, and that sometimes the hardest thing to do is to look in the mirror and see who you really are. The cameras had stopped rolling, the lights had dimmed, but the impact of those 36 seconds would echo far beyond the walls of that television studio, reaching every person who had ever been dismissed, every artist who had ever been mocked, every dreamer who had ever been told their work did not matter. Because in the end, this was not just a story about a talk show gone wrong. It was a story about values, about integrity, about the choice we all face every day to either build each other up or tear each other down. And on this morning, on live television, everyone got to see what happens when someone chooses wrong, and what it looks like when someone else chooses right. The silence in the studio was profound. Crew members stood motionless. They had never seen anything like this. One camera operator lowered her camera slowly. She looked at the empty chair where Denzel had been sitting. Michael remained in his seat, staring at his hands. They were shaking. He kept replaying the moment when he thought he was being clever. Robin came back onto the set. She walked over to Michael and sat down beside him. After a long moment, Michael spoke. "I grew up watching his movies. Training Day, Malcolm X Glory, and today I..." His voice broke. He could not finish the sentence. Robin put her hand on his shoulder. She said, "You made a mistake, but you owned it." Michael shook his head. "Does it? Does it really? Or am I just trying to save face because everyone saw what happened?" It was a fair question, one that hung in the air between them. George returned from his meeting. His face was grave. He sat down, facing Michael. "We need to talk about what happens next." Michael looked up, fear in his eyes. "Am I fired?" George paused. "That is not my decision. But what you did hurt this show. It hurt a man who deserved respect. And it revealed something you need to address." Michael nodded slowly. "I know." Robin leaned forward. "The question is who you want to be. This moment can destroy you or transform you, but only if you let it." George added, "Denzel could have destroyed you. He could have torn into you. Instead, he took the high road. He gave you a gift." Michael looked confused. "A gift?" Robin nodded. "He showed you what integrity looks like. He could have matched your disrespect. But he did not." The three sat as the studio emptied. Lights were being turned off. A makeup artist approached. She had worked in television since the 80s. "Excuse me, I wanted to say something." Michael looked up at her. "Please." She took a breath. "I have worked with Mr. Washington 3 times. Every time, he has been kind to everyone on set. He remembers names. He treats everyone like they matter." She paused. "So when you said what you said, you were not just insulting him. You were insulting everyone moved by his work." Michael's eyes filled with tears again. "I understand." The makeup artist nodded. "This industry is hard without people tearing each other down." She walked away, leaving Michael with the full weight of his actions. George stood up. "Take the rest of the day. Go home. Think about what happened." Robin stood. "You can come back from this, but it will take real work." They left Michael alone. He sat for 20 minutes. Finally, he stood. He made his way through the empty corridors. At the exit, he pulled out his phone. It was flooded with messages. He did not read them. Instead, he typed a note. "Today I learned being funny is not worth being cruel." As the day wore on, the story spread. Most recognized what Denzel had recognized, that this was about more than just a bad joke. It was about respect, about values, about how we treat people who create art that challenges us. And through it all, Denzel Washington remained quiet. He did not issue statements. He simply went about his day with the same grace he had shown on that set, because that is who he was. Not just an actor, but a man who understood that sometimes the most powerful response is silence. The sun set on New York City. In different parts of the city, the people involved were each grappling with what had happened. Michael sat in his apartment, alone with his regrets. Robin was at home with her family. George was reviewing the footage again, and Denzel was preparing for the next day, for the next interview. Because for him, this incident was not going to define his journey. He had walked off that set with something far more valuable than any television appearance. He had walked off with his integrity intact, his principles uncompromised, and his dignity unbowed. And in a world that so often rewards the loud, the brash, the disrespectful, that meant everything